Have you ever had the creeping, crawling sensation that someone is watching you? It may be goosebumps on your arms, or a tingling feeling on your neck, or just a shiver that runs up your spine, and all of a sudden you know that someone is there, looking at you, but you turn around to see there's nothing there. Nobody is behind you. Nobody is watching you. It was all in your head. But you know it's not in your head. And the feeling never really goes away. You try to tell your friends and family, but nobody believes you. At best, they think you're having an off day, week, month. At worst, the term gaslighting has had a bit of a resurgence lately. It's been memed, discussed, dissected, and applied to a variety of situations that may or may not be applicable. But where did the term come from? Gaslight is a 1944 thriller mystery film directed by
George Cukor,
starring Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman. It follows a woman, Paula, and her life after the unsolved murder of her aunt. She is sent to Italy to study opera in honor of her late aunt, who was a famous opera singer. While there, she falls in love with Gregory Anton, a charming man who, after a whirlwind romance, marries her. They return to London together, where they reside in Paula's late aunt's home, despite her misgivings about living in the place her aunt was murdered. And all is not well in their world of marital bliss. Paula begins to notice strange things happening around her. Pictures are missing, she's hearing footsteps in the middle of the night that seemingly belong to no one, and the gas lights in their house dim without ever being touched. She struggles to understand what is going on while fighting to maintain her sanity. I watched this movie for the first time recently, and even knowing what was going on, it was surprisingly hard for me to watch. I felt a pit in my stomach as I watched Paula go from curious and outspoken and confident to reserved, paranoid, and terrified of herself and her home. While I could give you a dictionary definition of what gaslighting is, I think it would be more effective for me to show you.
I don't know who he is.
Yet you smiled at him.
I tell you, I wasn't thinking. I don't know why I did it.
Like the other things.
What other things?
Oh, nothing. Only I've been noticing, Paula, that you've been forgetful lately.
Forgetful?
Losing things and... Oh, now, don't look so worried, Paula. It's nothing. You get tired and...
Yes, that's probably what it is. I get tired. But your present to me, your mother's brooch, and I wanted to wear it always. I don't remember opening my bag. Well, I suppose I must have... You did put it in there.
Don't you even remember that?
Yes. Yes, of course I do. Well, suddenly I'm beginning not to trust my memory at all.
That being said, I'm still going to give you a generally agreed upon definition. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse where a person makes someone question their sanity, perception of reality, or memories. People experiencing gaslighting often feel confused, anxious, and unable to trust themselves. Throughout the movie, Gregory is toying with Paula's perception of reality, first by telling her little lies about herself, and then manufacturing situations that fit his narrative so that Paula subconsciously or even consciously confirms it in her head. There were so many instances of this gaslighting in the movie that there was no way I could even put every example of it in the video. So if you're interested, I would recommend giving the movie a watch. The primary takeaway from the story is that Paula is being told things that she knows are untrue until her perception of reality is broken down and she can no longer think clearly. To those around her, she seems to become withdrawn and paranoid, further isolating Paula and sending her into a deeper spiral of despair. Similar themes are explored in the 2020 psychological thriller film The Invisible Man, starring Elizabeth Moss. Notice how I didn't list any other characters? And that's because Miss Elizabeth Please Leave the Church of Scientology Moss absolutely carried this film. She plays Cecilia Cass, the trapped wife of an Elon Musk-esque businessman who is on the cutting edge of optics. Side note, did y'all know Elon Musk is not actually a super genius? He's just a random guy running around with daddy's money. The people who work for him are the ones doing all the work. The more you know. Anyway, she orchestrates a grand escape and manages to get to a friend's house for the time being. But it's really not much of an escape at all. She's constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly wondering, is this the day that I get dragged back to that house? Well, more like compound, actually. But then she gets some unexpected news. Her ex-boyfriend, Adrian Griffin, is dead, the victim of an apparent suicide. But C knows her ex-boyfriend better than that, and she knows there's no way she could get away that easily. Being the head of a successful optics engineering company, Adrian had access to the most cutting-edge technology available, and C thinks he's somehow harnessed this technology and found a way to become completely invisible to the human eye. Those around her don't believe her, of course, but C believes she's received enough confirmation that this is all not simply in her head. She just has to get those around her to believe her. Watching The Invisible Man is a completely different experience to Gaslight because for most of the runtime, you don't even see the villain. Whereas with Gaslight, you would see Gregory actively gaslight Paula and feel the slow crawl of dread over your skin. In The Invisible Man, you remain on edge as you watch C become more and more paranoid and terrified of the man she knows is watching her from somewhere. She is being similarly isolated from her friends and family, just as Paula was, because people simply don't believe her, writing her concerns off as the ravings of a grief-stricken woman. Both of these stories share elements of gaslighting, but The Invisible Man introduces another layer to the horror. Voyeurism. The feeling that not only are your perceptions of reality being manipulated, but that you're also being watched by someone who you can't see, who nobody else can see. And that brings us to Jinji Ito's A Town Without Streets. I like a lot of Ito's mangas. I literally have the complete deluxe collection of Tomie, but this one really stuck with me. It's one of the few stories of his that doesn't involve graphic body horror, gore, or cosmic horror. Well, I mean it does, but it's not like the center of the story. The plot is kind of a mess, but, stay with me through this. By the way, if you would like to read it before watching this portion of the video, feel free. I liked it and I would recommend reading it just for your own reading pleasure, but I'll also be going over the basic plot in the video with spoilers. It begins with Saiko, a high school girl who is having dreams about a boy in her class named Kishimoto, which is kind of weird for her because she doesn't really like him like that. She mentions to her friends at school that maybe this is a sign that she likes him or something, and her friend brings up the idea that it might be that Kishimoto is using the Aristotle theory that they learned about in class, aka whispering your name into someone's ear while they sleep so that you're ingrained in their subconscious. So let's take stock of this. On its face, this is already a pretty weird and invasive thing to do. Like, you're basically trying to use mind tricks to get a girl to like you. But Saiko points out that they'd have to climb into the window of her second-story room, breaking and entering, which is insane and a complete invasion of privacy. Because of this, Saiko's like, that can't be what's happening. Until she's eating dinner with her family that night, and they mention hearing a boy's voice in her room at night. This gets her thinking, and so that night in her dream, she confronts the dream version of Kishimoto about this, and he admits that, yes, he's been breaking into her room every night to whisper his name into her ear. She's like, what the hell, dude? And he's like, well, I had a crush on you, and I was too nervous to approach you in real life. And she shuts him down immediately, like, listen, you cannot just be breaking into girls' houses like this. Like, maybe if you'd approached me at school, it would have been cool, but this is just too weird. Do not break into my house again. And then he apologizes and promises not to do it again. But then something kind of unexpected happens. A man in a trench coat appears holding a knife and calling himself Jack the Ripper, and he murders Kishimoto. Saiko wakes up, and she's like, that was a weird dream. And then she looks out her open window, and she sees Kishimoto lying down below, disemboweled. And, well, I guess that's weird, but that should also be the end of that, right? Gruesome as it was, it's over now. But skip ahead a few months, and we see that Saiko has been staying with her friends for a few weeks now because she doesn't feel comfortable at home. Not because of the whole thing with Kishimoto, but because her family, for some bizarre reason, will not stop spying on her in her own room. They're making literal peepholes in the walls and the doors, listening in by the door, and even hiding in her cabinet sometimes. But whenever she confronts them about it, they vehemently deny doing anything like that. For example, she points out that her little brother busted a hole in the wall separating their room just to sneak into her cupboard and watch her. She points out the hole in the wall to her father, and he says, "Oh, that? Well, that's been there since we've moved in." Saiko brings up her concerns multiple times, only for her parents to continue telling her that she's being paranoid and that she's acting out. It all comes to a head when she stabs an eye looking at her through one of the peepholes and smashes a finger that's trying to remove the covers that she's put up over the existing peepholes. The next morning at breakfast, she sees that her father is wearing an eye patch and her brother has a finger splint. Both of them lie, gaslighting her when she asks, and this is the last straw for her. She's being gaslit, lied to, and watched constantly. So she decides to pack it up and leaves for her aunt's house, who lives in another town. Something that I really like about this story is how active of a protagonist Saiko is. She doesn't just allow things to happen to her and has a very strong sense of self. And I want to stress that in real life, there's really no correct way to respond to gaslighting. It's a form of abuse, and you're not responsible for what happens to you or how you react to it. Both Gaslight and The Invisible Man showcase different reactions to gaslighting and manipulation, and The Town Without Streets presents another variation of this. With another difference being that while in Gaslight and The Invisible Man, the gaslighting and manipulation is being done by a romantic partner, The Town Without Streets explores the familial side of this. Saiko is a strong, self-assured character. She knows what she's experiencing, and she's not afraid to risk her parents getting upset at her to say it. It also takes a lot of resolve to be able to pack up your shit and leave home, much less leave for another town altogether. It also hints at how much trust she has in her aunt that she'll be able to stay there with her. Relationships between women, am I right? When Saiko sets out, she discovers that the buses don't run in her aunt's hometown anymore for some reason. But she's not put off. She just travels by foot. When she gets closer to where she remembers her aunt's house being, she sees more and more people wearing strange carnival masks everywhere they go. Yeah, I know. People wearing masks everywhere they go. What a strange phenomenon. She also runs into a lot of dead ends, with roads being completely obstructed by wooden houses that look newly made. Eventually, a man sees her wandering around and offers to help, and when she tells him where her aunt's house is, he offers to show her the way. He leads her up the road and then, to her surprise, takes her inside one of the wooden houses. As they walk, he explains that the inhabitants of that town woke up one day to find that the buildings had just appeared on their own. People would tear them down, only for the houses to reappear the next day on their own. Everyone just learned to live with it. Now, there are no more streets. To get anywhere, you must go through other people's houses. Their journey is brought to a pause when they come to a house whose owners have locked their doors to the public, meaning nobody can get to where they need to go. A small crowd of townspeople are outside, furious because, again, they can't get to where they need to go without crossing through people's houses, and eventually break down the door and apprehend the family inside, beating and restraining them as punishment for breaking the unspoken rules of their strange town. Saiko is disturbed and decides she will not be sticking around here, but she has to rescue her aunt from this weird place first. This is another thing that I really like about Saiko's character. She could have easily turned back at this point and just returned the way she came, but although she recognizes that this is a terrible place to live, she also recognizes that she needs to help her aunt escape. She had initially run out of the house before when all of the townspeople started beating and punishing the family that had barricaded their doors. But after she calms down a bit, she goes back to the house that they had needed to pass through before and finds the family from before tied up, so she unties them and helps them down. They tell her that they'd been desperate for any form of privacy in this place, so they'd resorted to barricading their doors, even though it's considered taboo or even illegal by the town. They also tell her that everyone wears masks to retain some level of privacy from others, and advise that she should wear one too. The family, as a gesture of their thanks for Saiko saving them, tells her where to find her aunt's house, but not before advising her that maybe she should just turn back, because they recognize the neighborhood that Saiko is describing, and it's a place with a lot of fatal stabbings and strange people. Saiko puts on a mask, but tells them no, she can't leave without her aunt. It's all the more reason that she needs to help her escape. She sets out once again and finally arrives at her aunt's house, except her aunt is nothing like Saiko remembers. Unlike the residents of the town, Saiko's aunt does not wear a mask to hide her face. She doesn't wear anything at all. Her aunt has given up any pretense at privacy, accepting that she will always live exposed and embracing this. Saiko sees multiple peepholes drilled into her aunt's walls, ceilings, with no attempt to cover them, and her doors and windows wide open for people to come and go as they please. Saiko begs her aunt to leave with her, but her aunt laughs and refuses, saying that instead, Saiko should stay here with her and embrace her rejection of privacy too. When Saiko refuses and argues with her, her aunt brandishes a knife, threatening to cut off Saiko's clothes for her, and Saiko runs out of the house in fear. Outside, she comes across strange humanoid creatures with long heads, and they turn to look at her, and she sees they have multiple eyes that they use to peep through the walls. She gets freaked out, of course, and runs into the man who'd been helping her earlier. He removes his mask to reveal that he's the man from her dream, the man who had killed Kishimoto and called himself Jack the Ripper. He confesses that he had been planning to kill her that night, but Kishimoto had gotten in the way. He takes out his knife, but before he has a chance to strike, Saiko's aunt stabs and kills him at the very last moment. Her aunt is more somber now and tells Saiko that if she wishes to find her way back from the town, she simply has to follow the stream of the river. Saiko asks her aunt to leave with her one more time, but her aunt just turns back to her home without another word. Saiko takes her bags and leaves the town without streets. There's a lot going on in this story, and at first glance, a lot of it is nonsensical. It goes from a strange story of an incel going too far for his crush, to Nightmare on Elm Street situation, to a paranoid voyeuristic fever dream, to a surreal and creepy story about a strange town. But I think that this story serves as a good lens into Ito's perspective on the perils of growing up as a girl in a society that wasn't designed for you. Looking at it this way, the separate pieces begin to come together in a more meaningful way. First, Kishimoto using the dream whispering technique on Saiko to get her to have a crush on him. This is clearly intrusive and weird, not only for the fact that he was regularly breaking into her room to do so, but that Kishimoto felt so entitled to Saiko's feelings in the first place that he thought it was okay to do this. Not once did he take her feelings into account when doing this to her, and all that mattered to him was that he liked her, and he was too afraid of rejection to tell her in person. But he still felt entitled enough to her time and affection that he orchestrated the whole plan. Saiko even admits at one point that she might have gone out with him had he not done all of this, but that's no longer an option for her. Jack the Ripper is a bit more of a confusing addition. We can scrutinize him with a bit more detail later. The next portion of the story takes place a few months after the first, but in terms of the metaphor, we can assume that if the first part of the story was meant to represent Saiko's entry into pubescence, complete with confusing new feelings and heterosexual relationships, this portion can be used as a stand-in for adolescence. Saiko is increasingly at odds with her family, questioning their decisions and their perceived ownership of her body. Although the family members themselves never admit to spying on her, Saiko insinuates that they are keeping tabs on her because they think she's sneaking boys into her room since Kishimoto had been sneaking in a few months prior. Despite her repeated assurances to the contrary, her parents do not trust her and continue to lie to her even when she prevents them with hard evidence of their spying. This is blatant manipulation and gaslighting from the people Saiko should be able to trust the most. When she makes up her mind to live with her aunt instead, this represents Saiko's first ventures into the real world. She's leaving home for the first time, she's going to a new place, and it's all very unfamiliar to her. This is emphasized when she arrives in the town, and she doesn't recognize anything. The people behave strangely, wear masks for seemingly no reason, and despite knowing where she needs to go, she ends up entirely turned around and with no idea how to get there. She accepts the help of a nice man who assists her part of the way, but then she encounters some unexpected and senseless violence. She has entered a world that has stripped away any pretense of privacy, of personhood, and Saiko doesn't understand it at all. Because Saiko is not yet completely disillusioned, she goes back to help the family, who tell her where she needs to go, but not before warning her of the dangers of living in a place like this. Again, Saiko is scared, but she refuses to abandon her aunt. Her first impulse is not to get out and save herself. Her first impulse is to reach out and help. Now, Saiko's aunt is interesting. She's an older woman that's been living in this world for much longer than Saiko has, and she's developed her own way of dealing with it. Rather than constantly worrying about safeguarding her privacy and personhood, she's embraced the idea that she will constantly be watched, basically be public property. It's kind of a, fuck it, what else am I supposed to do kind of mentality. She doesn't seem entirely stable either. She's a completely different person than Saiko remembers, which could perhaps be the rose-colored glasses of childhood falling away to reveal that her idols were never as great as she remembered, but I think it's more likely that living this way has changed her fundamentally on some level. In the beginning of the story, when Saiko is staying with a few of her friends for weeks on end to avoid her voyeuristic family, her friends eventually express similar displeasure with having their private space invaded. They tell her, hey, we're friends and I love you, but I cannot see you all the time like this. I need my own space too. And I feel like even we can relate to this in our day-to-day lives. We've all had that moment where you spend way too much time with one other person and it's just, you need space with them. They even say that you shouldn't work with your best friends or even live with your best friends sometimes, because not only would you possibly be bothered by their living habits, sometimes to maintain a healthy relationship with somebody, you both need to have space from one another and privacy from one another. When Saiko's friends tell her this could also be seen as Ito establishing that every person needs some level of privacy to survive. It isn't healthy to be constantly watched or intruded upon, and Saiko's aunt's behavior is an illustration of how continued intrusion and voyeurism can impact you. You can see a similar impact on C's mental health in The Invisible Man when she knows that she's constantly being watched, but there's nothing she can do to stop it. Saiko's aunt not only behaves strangely, she also brandishes a knife and threatens to cut off Saiko's clothing too, scaring off her own niece. Now let's talk about Jack the Ripper. At first glance, his addition in the story is a strange one. The story stands well enough on its own, has enough of its own disturbing elements throughout to keep the reader on edge. So what does this Jack the Ripper character add? I would argue that Jack is meant to be an amalgamation of the kinds of predatory men Saiko and girls like Saiko that are just entering adolescence or adulthood will encounter throughout their lives. In both instances when they meet, Jack is almost presented as a benefactor. First, he kills Kishimoto, who had been stalking Saiko and trying to manipulate her, and he also initially had been helping her navigate the confusing town, ingratiating himself, in a way, with Saiko. When it is revealed that he was the Ripper all along, he also tells her that when he visited her in the dream, he had actually been planning to kill her all along. Kishimoto had simply gotten in the way, tearing away the veneer of a man who was just trying to help by exposing that he had ulterior motives all along. I think another layer to this is the fact that he's named Jack the Ripper. Like, he could have easily been a nameless killer, but the fact that he's named after a serial killer notorious for killing and mutilating sex workers in particular, aka groups of women that are hyper-visible in a way other Victorian-era women weren't, and thus extra vulnerable and less protected, is significant. After all, he'd originally broken into Saiko's room to kill her, not Kishimoto. I think the fact that it's Saiko's aunt that comes up and saves her in the end is also significant. Throughout the story, Saiko has been shown to be very independent, strong-willed, and with a strong sense of self. And yet, when it comes down to this, at the end of the day, she's still only one person, only one girl. She needs support from others to get her through this. She needs some level of community. Whereas her friends had been able to provide that for her in her own hometown to some level, when her family couldn't, in this town, she is ostensibly isolated and alone. Just as Paula was in Gaslight and Cecilia Cass was in The Invisible Man. But she has an ally in her aunt. The moment serves to show that no matter how strong someone is and how confident they are in themselves, there will always be a moment when they need to rely on others, and hopefully they have relationships with people that they can depend on. The fact that it's Saiko's aunt who comes up to save her, the same aunt who Saiko had been hoping to depend on when her family had gone crazy on her, is also significant in that it demonstrates that Saiko is a good judge of character, that without all of this weird stuff going on in the town, perhaps she could have been able to stay with her aunt. But this is just some things that she can't really account for. Her aunt also, again, is more somber and sober in this scene. She tells Saiko to leave this town and also tells her how to escape. She doesn't try and convince Saiko to stay with her. She doesn't try and say, look, now that I saved you, you should stay here. Because on some level, she recognizes that what's best for her niece is not staying with her. It's leaving this strange town altogether. And isn't that what womanhood is all about, honestly? Looking out for one another, protecting each other when you can. I know a lot of this might have been a stretch because it's like Jinji Ito is not like a a well-renowned feminist or whatever, even though I will say that he is by far one of the better male writers in the horror genre with female protagonists. Again, Tomie. But also throughout like a lot of his one-shots, the female characters are never really presented as like the vulnerable maidens that or damsels that need to be rescued. So I will give him credit for that. But I really think he might have tapped into something here, you know? I'll finish off with a quote from Margaret Atwood. You know, the lady who wrote The Handmaid's Tale. Pretending you're unseen, pretending you have a life of your own, that you can wash your feet and comb your hair, unconscious of the ever-present watcher peering through the keyhole in your own head, if nowhere else. You are a woman with a man inside watching a woman. You are your own voyeur. And you know, I've done a lot of analysis in this video, but for that, you can use your own brain cells to connect that to the story somehow. And I know I used a lot of gendered language throughout this video, but I do want to stress that although I was coming from that patriarchal understanding of womanhood and girlhood, that this is not meant to exclude anyone's experiences on the gender spectrum, and that if you have ever identified with any of this at any point of your life, then this is also for you. Honestly, I just really wanted to talk about The Town Without Streets after I read it, and having a YouTube channel to do that with now, and having people that would actually like want to interact and engage with that content is just really great. So yeah, tell me what you think in the comments, whether you agree, disagree, yeah. By the way, sometimes I have these video ideas that I know probably wouldn't be that popular, but I still want to make it. But like, I don't want to just be like releasing stuff that's gonna flop. So I was thinking I would make a Patreon for that reason, and also because I love money. But my reasoning was basically that if you're willing to pay $1 to me every month, then you'll probably be more willing to engage with my less conventional content as well. So yeah, let me know if you'd be into that, and if not, I might just make it anyway because I don't know. I'm different. I was built different. I was born different. I'm an Aquarius. Please like the video, comment to engage. Oh, subscribe, and I always forget to say to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when I post, because, you know, I do measure a YouTuber's success by the number of first comments that they get. Because it's just funny because every single person, there's only one person that's ever going to be correct, and everyone else will just be lying, yet they still write it. And I love that. That's so human of us, right? Am I just talking to fill up the airtime so that I can have this video be exactly 30 minutes long? Yes, It does not help any algorithms. There's no reason to do this other than the fact that I just like round numbers. I don't know what to tell you. All right, yeah. So it's getting close to the 2-minute mark. I think we're there. Okay, thanks. Bye. I love you.